Over 60, top 5 fish you should avoid for healthy eyes. Stop right there, because what I'm about to tell you will shock you. 99% of people over 60 have no idea that the very fish they've been told are healthy could actually be destroying their eyesight. Yes, destroying it. Imagine thinking you're protecting your heart, your brain, even your vision, when in reality every bite is quietly pushing you closer to cataracts, macular degeneration, and permanent vision loss. Sounds unbelievable, right? After all, fish is supposed to be one of the healthiest foods on the planet. Doctors recommend it, magazines praise it, some people eat it every single day. But here's the twist, not all fish are created equal. Some are packed with mercury, dangerous chemicals, and inflammatory fats that attack the very nerves and blood vessels keeping your eyesight clear. And if you're over 60, your body is less able to fight off those toxins, meaning the damage adds up faster than you think. Now, some of you watching might be saying, "Come on, fish can't be that bad." Others may be nodding their heads because you've already heard whispers about mercury or farming problems. But whether you're skeptical or already suspicious, stick with me, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly which 5 fish you must avoid if you want to protect your vision. And I promise you this, a few of the names on this list will absolutely surprise you. But I'm not just here to scare you, I'll also share the safe, smarter alternatives that will help keep your eyes sharp well into your 70s, 80s, and beyond. This isn't rumor or guesswork. It's backed by decades of medical research and patient experience. Before we get started, do me one quick favor, hit that like button, share this with someone you care about, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more hard-hitting, life-changing health information straight to you without the sugar-coating or empty promises. So, are you ready? Let's pull back the curtain and expose the truth about fish and your eyes, starting with a type of fish nearly everyone buys at the grocery store, thinking it's the healthy choice, but it's actually one of the worst. Why eye health matters after 60. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin with a simple truth I've seen countless times in my years of practice. Our eyes are our windows to independence. When vision begins to fade, it doesn't just affect how clearly you see, it changes how you live. Driving at night starts to feel unsafe. Reading the newspaper becomes harder. Even recognizing a friend across the room takes extra effort. And when those little daily struggles add up, confidence slips away. By the time we pass 60, the risk of eye disease rises sharply. Age-related macular degeneration, cataracts, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, these conditions become more common every year. The National Eye Institute reports that more than 5 million Americans over 65 already suffer from severe vision impairment, and that number is expected to double in the coming decades. The reason is simple. The eye is one of the most metabolically active organs in the body. It's constantly working, constantly burning energy. That makes it vulnerable to oxidative stress and long-term damage from sunlight, pollution, poor diet, and toxins. Take the retina, for example. It's packed with photoreceptor cells that depend on healthy fats, vitamins, and minerals to keep sending clear signals to the brain. When nutrition falls short, or when harmful substances build up, damage begins silently, often years before blurred vision or faded colors appear. That's why what you eat, especially after 60, can make such a dramatic difference in how well you see. Fish, in particular, can be a powerful ally. Omega-3 fatty acids like DHA and EPA are essential for eye health. DHA is a major structural fat in the retina, while EPA reduces inflammation in the blood vessels that feed your eyes. A study in JAMA Ophthalmology showed that people who ate omega-3-rich fish regularly had a 30 to 40% lower risk of advanced macular degeneration. Vitamin D, another nutrient found in fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, helps support healthy eye tissue and lower the risk of retinal disease. Zinc, which the retina stores in large amounts, allows vitamin A to travel from the liver to the eye to create melanin, the pigment that protects against light damage. The landmark age-related eye disease study proved that zinc could slow vision loss in patients with macular degeneration. And let's not forget selenium, a trace mineral that teams up with vitamin E to defend the eye against free radicals that contribute to cataracts and retinal decline. But here's the part many people overlook. Not all fish are safe choices. Some bring as many risks as benefits. Large predatory fish like swordfish and king mackerel carry high levels of mercury, a neurotoxin that damages not only the brain but also the optic nerve. Research from Harvard shows that seniors with higher mercury levels have more vision problems and faster cognitive decline. Farmed fish often contain industrial pollutants like PCBs and dioxins that fuel oxidative stress and inflammation, both of which are key drivers of cataracts and retinal disease. And when farmed fish are fed unnatural diets, they develop an unhealthy balance of omega-6 to omega-3 fats, tipping the scale toward inflammation rather than protection. So while fish can be your eye's best friend, the wrong fish can quietly become your worst enemy. And for those of us over 60, when our natural defenses aren't as strong as they once were, the consequences are magnified. As a physician who has walked this road with thousands of patients, I remind them of one powerful truth. You can't change your age and you can't change your genetics, but you can absolutely change what's on your plate. And let me leave you with a question worth asking yourself right now. Is the fish you're eating truly protecting your eyesight, or could it be slowly harming it? Most people never think about it. But once you know the difference, you can take control and give your eyes the support they need to carry you clearly into your 70s, 80s, and beyond. Fish number 5, farmed tilapia. The hidden risk fish that looks healthy but harms the eyes. Let's begin the countdown with a surprising one, farmed tilapia. At first glance, tilapia seems like the perfect choice. It's inexpensive, easy to cook, mild in taste, and often promoted as a lean, healthy protein. Many of my patients proudly told me they switched to tilapia to replace red meat or fried foods, believing they were making the smarter choice. And yes, tilapia does provide protein, but when it comes to protecting your eyes after 60, the truth is that this fish may be quietly working against you. The problem lies in its fatty acid profile. Unlike salmon or sardines, which are rich in omega-3, tilapia contains very little of these protective fats and is instead loaded with omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-6 on its own isn't harmful, but balance is everything. Ideally, our diets should maintain an omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of about 4:1. Farmed tilapia, however, can reach ratios as high as 11:1 or more. For the eyes, this imbalance matters. Excess omega-6 drives chronic inflammation, and inflammation is one of the strongest risk factors for age-related macular degeneration, diabetic retinopathy, and cataract progression. A 2008 study from Wake Forest University even suggested that eating too much tilapia might be worse for your health than eating bacon or donuts when it comes to inflammatory effects. Imagine that. What many people call diet fish may actually be fanning the flames of inflammation in your eyes. There's another layer to the story, how tilapia is farmed. In many countries, fish are raised in crowded pens where poor water quality demands heavy antibiotic use. These conditions often expose tilapia to pollutants, and chemical residues can end up in the fillets that reach your table. Over time, these residues contribute to oxidative stress, weakening the eyes and making them more vulnerable to damage. I'll share a case that stays with me. Elena, a 72-year-old patient, was diagnosed with early macular degeneration. Determined to improve her health, she cleaned up her diet and ate grilled tilapia 3 times a week. She thought she was doing everything right, but her condition progressed faster than expected. When we reviewed her meals, it became clear. She was overloading on omega-6 and starving her body of omega-3s. I encouraged her to replace tilapia with wild-caught salmon and sardines, both rich in the omega-3s DHA and EPA. Within 9 months, her inflammation markers improved and her retinal scans showed slower progression of disease. She told me, "Doctor, I thought I was eating clean, but I was actually feeding the problem." Her story isn't unique. Research continues to confirm that diets high in omega-6 and low in omega-3 increase the risk of systemic inflammation. And when that inflammation lingers, it doesn't just affect the heart or joints. It directly impacts the eyes. So I encourage you to ask yourself, are you eating tilapia because it's convenient and affordable without realizing the hidden cost to your vision? The good news is there are better alternatives. If you enjoy mild, white fish, wild-caught cod or haddock are excellent choices. They're lean, low in toxins, and while they don't offer as much omega-3 as salmon, they won't overload your body with omega-6 either. Combined with a diet rich in vegetables and balanced with safer omega-3 rich fish like salmon or sardines, they can help protect your eyesight for years to come. So while tilapia may look harmless on your plate, the science tells us otherwise. After 60, when every nutritional choice matters more than ever, it's worth choosing fish that truly support your vision rather than quietly putting it at risk. Fish number 4, canned tuna. The convenience trap that silently worsens eye health. If tilapia is the budget trap, then canned tuna is the convenience trap. For decades, Americans have leaned on tuna because it's inexpensive, packed with protein, easy to store, and makes a quick lunch. Many of my patients grew up eating tuna casserole or tuna salad sandwiches at least once a week, and some still reach for it regularly. On the surface, tuna seems like a safe, sensible choice, especially since it does contain omega-3s. But the truth is that canned tuna also carries a hidden danger, mercury, that can quietly harm your vision over time. Mercury is a neurotoxin, which means it damages nerve cells, and your optic nerve and retina are among the most sensitive tissues in the body. A 2017 study in environmental health found that older adults with higher mercury levels had significantly worse vision and cognitive performance. Another study in investigative ophthalmology and visual science linked mercury exposure to a greater risk of retinal degeneration, a major cause of vision loss in seniors. The reason tuna is risky is that it's a large, predatory fish, and the bigger the fish, the more mercury it accumulates from the smaller fish it eats. While light tuna contains less mercury than albacore, both types can reach levels high enough to be concerning, especially if eaten often. Mercury doesn't just affect the nerves. It also increases oxidative stress inside the lens of the eye, and over time this contributes to cataracts. In fact, research on Japanese fishermen revealed that those with higher lifetime mercury exposure had almost double the risk of developing cataracts compared to those with lower exposure. For seniors already facing natural age-related changes in their eyes, adding mercury to the mix only accelerates the decline. I think of Mr. Harris, a 68-year-old retired teacher who came to me complaining of blurry vision and difficulty driving at night. He was healthy in every other respect. No smoking, no diabetes, no family history of eye disease. But when we reviewed his diet, he admitted to eating tuna salad sandwiches nearly every day. His mercury levels tested far above normal. Once he replaced tuna with safer alternatives like canned sardines and wild salmon, his mercury levels dropped and his vision stabilized. He later told me, "Doctor, I thought I was eating healthy. I never realized tuna could be part of the problem." Stories like his remind us that convenience can sometimes come with a cost. According to the FDA, canned tuna is one of the leading sources of mercury in the American diet. Most people never stop to think about how those daily choices add up over years. So I'll ask you this. When you open a can of tuna, are you only thinking about the protein you're getting, or are you also considering the toxins that may come along with it? The good news is that you don't have to give up convenience to protect your eyes. Sardines and canned wild salmon are excellent substitutes. Sardines are small fish, low on the food chain, which means they carry almost no mercury. Yet they're packed with omega-3s, vitamin D, and calcium if you eat the bones, all nutrients your eyes need. Canned wild salmon is another safe option, giving you DHA and EPA without the mercury burden. Choosing these alternatives allows you to enjoy the same ease and affordability, while actually supporting your eye health instead of undermining it. Fish number 3, swordfish. The luxury choice that speeds up vision decline. When we think of luxury seafood, swordfish often comes to mind. It's expensive, found on the menus of upscale restaurants, and many people believe it's a heart-healthy, protein-rich alternative to red meat. But for seniors over 60 who want to preserve their eyesight, swordfish may be one of the most dangerous choices. The concern is mercury, and in swordfish the levels are extreme. According to the FDA and EPA, swordfish ranks among the highest mercury fish in the world. A single serving can contain far more than the weekly safe limit. Because swordfish are large, long-lived predators, they accumulate mercury year after year by feeding on smaller fish. By the time they're served at your table, their flesh holds a concentrated dose of a toxin the human body struggles to eliminate. Mercury doesn't leave quickly. It can linger for months or even years, quietly building up and attacking sensitive tissues like the retina, the optic nerve, and the brain. For the eyes, this is especially dangerous. Studies have shown a strong link between mercury exposure and age-related macular degeneration, the leading cause of blindness in seniors. A Harvard study found that older adults with elevated mercury levels had a 47% higher risk of advanced macular degeneration. Researchers believe mercury damages the delicate blood vessels in the retina, accelerating degeneration and vision loss. That means the swordfish steak that looks elegant on your plate may be slowly robbing you of your ability to read, drive, or recognize faces. I remember Mrs. Caldwell, a 70-year-old patient who came to me worried about her rapidly declining eyesight. She had been diagnosed with macular degeneration just 2 years earlier, but her vision was deteriorating far faster than expected. When we reviewed her habits, one detail stood out. Every Friday night, she and her husband went out for dinner, and she always ordered swordfish. She believed it was the healthier choice compared to steak, but her mercury levels turned out to be among the highest I'd seen in someone her age. Once she removed swordfish from her diet, replaced it with wild salmon and trout, and added antioxidant-rich foods, we were able to slow her disease progression. She later told me, "Doctor, if I had known swordfish was this risky, I never would have touched it." Her story is not unusual. Research published in Environmental Research has shown that chronic mercury exposure doesn't just raise the risk of eye disease. It also contributes to heart problems and cognitive decline, two conditions that often develop alongside vision loss in seniors. So the question becomes clear. Is that so-called luxury dinner worth the price of your eyesight? The good news is that you can enjoy delicious, restaurant-quality fish without taking the same risks. Wild Alaskan salmon and rainbow trout are excellent alternatives. They're rich in omega-3s, vitamin D, and antioxidants that help protect the retina, and they come without the heavy mercury burden. In fact, salmon is one of the most studied fish for its eye health benefits, with evidence showing it helps slow the progression of macular degeneration. Trout offers similar protection in a clean, flavorful package. So while swordfish may carry the image of sophistication, the science tells us it carries a hidden cost. For anyone over 60 who values their eyesight, choosing safer alternatives is the smarter, healthier path. Fish number 2, farmed salmon. The everyday favorite that isn't as healthy as you think. When most people think of a healthy seafood option, salmon is the first fish that comes to mind. It's promoted on wellness blogs, included in doctors' nutrition guides, and even recommended in senior health programs. And yes, wild salmon is one of the best foods you can eat for your eyes and your overall health. But here's the catch. Most of the salmon in grocery stores isn't wild. It's farmed, and that makes a big difference. More than 70% of salmon sold in the United States is farmed in places like Norway, Chile, and Canada. These fish are raised in crowded pens where disease spreads easily, and to keep them alive, farmers often use heavy doses of antibiotics. Traces of those drugs can make their way into the salmon you bring home. Farmed salmon also carry much higher levels of PCBs, industrial chemicals banned decades ago, but still lingering in the environment. Studies have shown that farmed salmon can contain 6 to 10 times more PCBs than wild salmon, and these chemicals accumulate in the fatty tissues we eat. PCBs have been linked to higher rates of cataracts and even retinal degeneration. Another issue is diet. Wild salmon thrive on krill and smaller fish, which gives them their deep color and rich omega-3 content. Farmed salmon, on the other hand, are fed processed pellets that alter their nutrient profile. Instead of being packed with omega-3s, they often end up with a higher omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. That imbalance drives inflammation, and inflammation is one of the most damaging forces for aging eyes. For vision, the impact is clear. PCBs and the wrong fatty acid balance both contribute to oxidative stress, which damages the retina and accelerates macular degeneration. They also cloud the lens more quickly, fueling cataract progression. A 2004 study published in Science warned that eating farmed salmon more than twice a month could expose people to unsafe levels of PCBs. For older adults, whose bodies can't detoxify as efficiently, this risk is even greater. I think of Mr. Lewis, a 66-year-old retired engineer who came to me after learning he had early cataracts. He didn't smoke, he exercised, and he had no family history of eye disease, yet his vision was declining. When we looked at his diet, the culprit was obvious. He was eating salmon 4 nights a week, but every package came from farmed Atlantic salmon. Without realizing it, he was filling his body with toxins and inflammatory fats. We switched him to wild Alaskan sockeye salmon, cut his servings to 2 per week, and balanced his diet with other low-toxin fish. Within a year, his cataracts slowed and his eye health stabilized. He told me later, "Doctor, I thought I was making the best choice, but I had no idea farmed salmon could be part of the problem." So let me ask you, when you buy salmon, do you focus only on the price tag, or do you consider what it might be doing to your vision? If you enjoy salmon, and I hope you do, always look for wild-caught Alaskan salmon. Sockeye, coho, and pink from Alaska are among the cleanest and most nutrient-dense fish in the world. They're rich in DHA, EPA, and vitamin D, all of which your eyes depend on without the heavy contamination of farmed salmon. Yes, wild salmon costs more, but when the trade-off is your eyesight, that investment is worth every penny. Fish number 1, king mackerel. The deceptive delicacy that can wreck senior eye health. At number 1 on our list is a fish that often carries the image of fine dining and sophistication. King mackerel. It appears on restaurant menus in elegant dishes and even in cookbooks that claim to promote healthy eating. But for seniors over 60, especially those focused on protecting their vision, king mackerel may be one of the most dangerous choices of all. The reason is mercury. Among all commonly eaten fish, king mackerel ranks at the very top for contamination. According to the FDA, mercury levels in king mackerel are so high that they advise children and pregnant women to avoid it altogether. What people forget is that seniors are equally vulnerable. Mercury isn't just a concern for developing brains. It's toxic to aging eyes and nerves as well. Once it enters the body, it accumulates in the optic nerve and retina, disrupting communication between the eyes and the brain. Over time, this can cause worsening visual clarity, poor night vision, and an increased risk of macular degeneration. Age makes the problem worse. Our bodies naturally become less efficient at clearing heavy metals. What a younger adult might detoxify in weeks can linger for months or even years in someone over 70. That means mercury builds up more quickly, causing greater damage with smaller exposures. Research in environmental research found that older adults with higher mercury levels had 40% more vision problems and a much greater likelihood of retinal disease. This isn't a theoretical risk, it's something I've seen repeatedly in practice. I recall Mrs. Franklin, a 74-year-old patient who loved seafood dinners with her family. Her son was a chef, and king mackerel was often featured on the table. Over time, she developed serious vision problems, difficulty reading, trouble recognizing faces, and almost complete night blindness. When we tested her mercury levels, they were alarmingly high. She was stunned. "Doctor," she said, "I thought fish was supposed to be good for me." And she was right, fish can be one of the best foods for your health, but the wrong fish can be devastating. Once we eliminated king mackerel and replaced it with safer choices like sardines and wild salmon, her mercury levels dropped. While the damage couldn't be completely reversed, her eyesight stabilized and her decline slowed. Her story is a powerful reminder that what looks like a delicacy on the plate can carry a hidden cost to your vision and independence. So ask yourself, when you see king mackerel offered as a special at a restaurant, do you see a treat? Or do you see the long-term risk it brings to your eyes? The good news is that not all mackerel are the same. Atlantic mackerel, the smaller, oily variety, is one of the cleanest, safest, and most nutrient-rich fish you can eat. It's naturally low in mercury and packed with omega-3s that nourish the retina and protect against inflammation. Alongside Atlantic mackerel, sardines, herring, and wild salmon all provide excellent eye health benefits without the toxic load. King mackerel, however, is one fish that seniors should avoid entirely. When it comes to protecting your vision after 60, there are far better and safer options on the table. So there you have it, the top 5 fish that can quietly damage your eyesight after 60. Farmed tilapia, canned tuna, swordfish, farmed salmon, and king mackerel. Each one carries hidden risks, from mercury to toxic chemicals to inflammatory fats that slowly weaken the retina, cloud the lens, and rob you of the vision you need to live fully and independently. But here's the takeaway I want you to remember. Your eyesight is not just about genetics or age, it's about choices. The food you put on your plate every day has the power to protect your eyes or to destroy them. And the truth is, most people never make that connection until it's too late. Now you know. You have the knowledge to avoid the dangerous fish and replace them with safer, smarter choices like wild salmon, sardines, cod, haddock, and Atlantic mackerel. These are the foods that can help keep your vision sharper longer. Let me leave you with one last thought. Eyesight is freedom. It's the ability to drive at night, to read your favorite book, to see your grandchildren's faces clearly. Don't trade that freedom for a cheap dinner or a fancy menu item. Protect your vision. It's worth more than any short-term taste or convenience. Thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, do me a favor, hit the like button. Share it with a friend who needs this information. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our future videos. Your support gives us the motivation to keep digging into the research and bringing you the truth about food and aging health. Take care of your eyes, take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.